Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hello and good morning. Want to welcome you all here today to the Commonwealth Club, and I'm happy and pleased to be the moderator for today's program, The Future of Downtown San Francisco. I'm a staff writer at the San Francisco Standard, which is a relatively new online news source, sfstandard.com. Got to do a quick plug. My focus at the Standard is on the recovery of San Francisco's economy in the post-pandemic. So today's topic is of particular importance to me. This is my first time moderating a Commonwealth Club panel, and I couldn't think of a more timely and relevant topic. There is perhaps no more important topic to San Francisco's future than this. Quite frankly, we're at a critical juncture for downtown San Francisco. And there was hopes that this fall would be a turning point, where employees would come back and streets would be filled as they once were. That hasn't happened. While things have certainly improved from the near-apocalyptic emptiness of the early days of the pandemic, today many buildings remain quiet on most days, and human traffic on sidewalks and streets is still limited. Some people have returned to offices, but hybrid work is becoming the norm. Recently, Mayor London Breed publicly recognized that her push to have employees return to the office has had limited impact and began to voice the need for new solutions to turn around and enliven downtown. And that's what we're here to discuss. And let's be clear, we need a vibrant downtown and vibrant neighborhoods. It's not an either or. A vibrant downtown helps the city overall, including the payments of property taxes, which help fund the city's government and services. And it's clear we have reached a pivot point. We need new solutions and approaches to bring back downtown San Francisco, and that's why we're here today. With speakers inside and outside San Francisco city government who are committed to bringing back the area, or turning the area into a thriving region once again. Yes, we want to talk about the problems we're facing, and there are many, but we also want to talk about what's being done and what is the path forward. We're starting with two of our speakers, Robbie Silver, the head of the Downtown SF Partnership, and Laura Crescimano of SiteLab. Before we jump into a conversation, a reminder that we want our audience to ask questions. If you have questions for me or any of the guests, if you're in person, please write them on the question cards on your seats. If you're watching online, please put them into the YouTube chat feature, and questions will be given to me throughout the program. I hope to get to as many of them as possible. So let's jump in. Robbie, I'd like to start with you. We're here to discuss the future of downtown San Francisco, and you are the head of the Downtown SF Partnership. Tell us a little about your organization and kind of give us a little scene setter for what we're going to be discussing today.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction, and great to see people in person. Good morning, everyone. I'm Robbie Silver, the Executive Director of the Downtown SF Partnership. And for those who don't know, the city has 18 what we call community benefit districts. And we were formed in January of 2020, 2 months exactly before the pandemic hit. We serve the Financial District and Jackson Square neighborhoods. It's about 43 square blocks. 75% of my budget actually goes straight toward cleaning and safety. And these are my district boundaries on a screen. They're very hard to describe, so that's why I put a visual. But as you can see, we cover most of the downtown economic core, which has just been completely devastated economically based on the pandemic. We need to reimagine downtown. You know, this is a pivotal moment that we can actually make a difference and do something about it. Through our work with our board of directors, we decided that we needed to do something in the public realm as a start. Why not do something that we can control, which is what happens on our alleys, on our back streets. There's so much layered history in downtown San Francisco. The waterfront used to come right up to Montgomery, back in the day. There's buried ships underneath the Financial District, and that's a story, that we can play out in the public realm. 2 pilots that we've done so far to date. This is Battery Street, which was closed to vehicular traffic in 2020 as part of Better Market Street. Obviously, we didn't want this to be the representative of a new public space in downtown San Francisco. We worked directly with the city and commissioned local mission-based artist, Claudio Talavera Bayon, to paint a 1,900 square foot mural right on the street. It took 5 weeks to complete, and here is an aerial shot. We now have new landscaping, and we activate this on Tuesdays and Thursdays for lunchtime. Another pilot that we did very successfully last year that we're bringing back this year is called Let's Glow SF. It became the largest holiday projection mapping event in the United States, where we projection mapped light shows on 4 downtown properties for 10 nights in December. This was a test case for us because we wanted to find out if we gave people a reason to come downtown, would they? And would they come after 5 p.m.? Well, 40,000 people did. We sent out a survey and had a QR code after each light show, and we asked, if you came downtown, did you go shopping? Did you go out to eat? Did you go out for cocktails? And we calculated about a $2.2 million economic impact. So we're very excited to bring back Let's Glow this year, December 2nd through the 11th, which will be on One Bush, the Stock Exchange, the corner of Commercial and Leidesdorff, and the historic Hobart building. But we knew doing pilots wasn't enough. We needed to have a strategic plan in front of us to guide us. What could we do in the public realm to make downtown San Francisco reimagined and more meaningful, not only to the workforce, but how do we market and create a new destination to our own downtown or to our own San Francisco residents and folks throughout the Bay Area? This is why we brought on Laura Crescimano, principal of SiteLab, to come up with a very comprehensive 150-page public realm action plan, which is on our website at downtownsf.org. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thanks, Robbie. So I'm Laura Crescimano, founder of SiteLab Urban Studio. We are a studio of about 20 urban designers, architects, landscape architects based in San Francisco. And we work really across a scale of projects. We work on large-scale plans like the Fifth and Mission project, which just opened its first phase in a public park at Fifth and Mission, to work for Google on going from an traditional office park to a mixed-use neighborhood environment, and particularly on public realms and how we bring together all of the parts that make cities, places we want to be and that we know and love. And so we were personally invested, I would say, in engaging with Robbie and his team on downtown and what the future is here. Downtown, I think we've all seen the ways in which neighborhoods have thrived, and we've seen a return to the neighborhood. And at the same time, downtown has a different role. It is a center of gravity. All roads lead to downtown. It's a job center where we have capacity for over 200,000 jobs. And so it also is a historic hub, right? And with, as Robbie mentioned, all these layers of history. So there's these bones here that we want to think about what is its next life. It's been through actually many lives in San Francisco. We all know the impact of the pandemic that the trips to downtown have gone down. We've seen them creeping back up, particularly for work, although in a different format than maybe we saw before. But downtown also used to serve for tourism and as a social destination and a shopping destination, and those trips have also taken a hit. And so we've been thinking about what does it mean, as Robbie said, to think about this next era of downtown. We did a lot of research and we asked people. So we had a survey to the public with nearly 900 responses, as well as on-the-ground observations and intercept surveys and other research. And one of the interesting things to us was to ask people what they would want to see, what would make them come back to downtown or return to downtown more. And one of the interesting things to me is clearly we know that there are sentiments, both real and perhaps perceived, about cleanliness and safety. But interestingly, we put on the list the resolution of COVID. Would that be the thing that would make you come to work more? And it was nearly last on the list. And in fact, people wanted to see more like a kind of liveliness to downtown, more green, more restaurants, more gathering places, more art, more events, right? A greater social purpose to downtown. And so a lot of this work, and I should note, as Robbie did, that this is not the answer to all things for downtown or for the city of San Francisco. We are coming at it from one perspective, which is the public realm, to start to plant seeds, really, for a different way of looking at our city and our downtown. And so how can downtown be more of a social destination? And that social destination is for workers to have more reasons to come down to the office. It's a choice to come to the office now for many workers, not all, but for many. But also families. That test case of Let's Glow, would you come at night, right? What are the reasons to come at night or stay after work or come on a weekend? So this is an image that's really an illustration and provocation of actually a location at Commercial in Leidesdorf where Let's Glow will be happening. But it is really representative of a whole, fabric that we have to work with. And in this case, actually, there are no public parks in this district. There are privately owned public spaces, plazas, and they are the streets that make up 30% of the land is streets and alleys. And in particular, there's this great alley fabric. So we are looking at how do we reconsider that. Part of this plan is to say we need to move from one-offs to campaigns. And so how do we get more people together and think of this really as a public and private endeavor that we do together, from improving those privately owned public spaces to just literally planting more trees, having more green to make this more compelling to walk down the street. And then we also did quite a bit of work in saying, where would we have the most impact? So we identified a series of locations, and you can see the first one here, Action Area A, as Commercial in Leidesdorf, as places where we see a combination of a lot of the ingredients that could be great hubs, great moments in downtown. So those have, whether it's they have active restaurants, they have public spaces, they have kind of cool historic buildings, different. They also have potentially investment, already planned projects by the city. And so how do we bring that all together for impact? And then this example, Commercial in Leidesdorf. This is where we're starting. Actually, we're moving from that broader plan to our first pilot from that plan, Action Area A at Commercial in Leidesdorf. And here you can actually see in that image that the historic coastline of San Francisco did run through this area, and those, you may see those little black kind of dots are buried ships. So there's a really interesting story here, as well as restaurants and kind of current life, and we're hoping to see even more future life with San Francisco vendors and artists. So this is an image of that alleyway and a historic building there that we think is just calling out for a kind of art and reconception. And we are doing this as a coordinated effort with the Downtown SF Partnership, as well as the city and the mayor's office, in terms of being a pilot. So essentially, this is not a one-off. This is actually setting up a model so that this can then be, this idea of activity hubs can be catalyzed around the downtown to start to seed from the ground up with local business owners that kind of energy in the public realm that might compel people to rethink downtown and to come, whether it is for work or to bring your family on a weekend and evening. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, and with that, I will hand it back to Kevin.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. And I'm going to bring up Kate Sophis of the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. As Laura mentioned, the city. Kate, maybe you can just talk a little bit about your reactions or your thoughts on this public realm action plan and what it could really do to transform some of these areas we're talking about.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm head up the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, which in normal times focuses on helping businesses who are here grow, helping people secure employment. And so in the context of all of that work and our response in the last few years to COVID, it is really an amazing moment in time where we will continue to do all of that, but really, I think, have come together with community, with our mayor, to deeply understand both the crisis, but also the opportunity we have right now to really literally fill our vacancies in our economic core with new kinds of businesses, new kinds of activities, and of course, all of that sits within the public realm. So I think from where we are, and our mayor shares this vision, we wholeheartedly agree that it is this moment in time that we actually have to refill our economic core with what we maybe thought, that was kind of missing, and I can speak to my own personal narrative. I've been in the city now for almost 30 years. My teenage kids are born and raised here. We still live here. And one of the things that drew me and so many people I know to San Francisco was our creative culture. This place where you could come from a city like Buffalo, New York, where I grew up, where there wasn't a lot of economic opportunity, where my parents, who were symphony musicians, were struggling economically to make it work. And then here was San Francisco, this beacon of tolerance, this place where you could come and try new things, whether it's new things in technology or new things in the arts. So I think it is a critical moment, but also an exciting moment where we can seize the opportunity to create new kinds of experiences in our economic core. And there's both sort of the landscaping and the hardscaping, but there's also the programming. So a lot of what our office is doing in partnership with the Downtown Partnership is looking at how we can take some city investment to help more arts organizations have opportunities to either have pop-up performances or installations or live music, or even how we can look at retail vacancies, restaurant vacancies as well on the ground floor. And again, as we are trying to have more dining experiences and more artistic experiences, how we can both have short-term pop-up programming as well as look for longer-term tenants in those spaces. I do want to say when I speak about and use the word economic core, and this is something we've been sort of trying to find the right language, when we at the city are looking at our recovery, we really have looked at a number of, let's call them zones, that make up these parts of our city, the greater downtown, if you will, that have historically housed so many of our jobs and our destination retail. So we think of it including the financial district, but we are also looking at, I think, Robbie, you had it on your map, south of Market and Union Square, and really how, and down to Mission Bay, how these three areas really work together. So as I sort of respond to questions, I'm really always going to be thinking about downtown proper, but also how it relates to these areas immediately around it.
So I want to bring up our final guest, Wade Rose here from Advance SF.
My timing's pretty good here.
Impeccable.
Hi.
Good morning, Wade.
It's raining in Marin, big time. So here I am.
Wade, maybe you can just give a little bit of background on Advance SF itself and kind of what role you're trying to have it play in the revival of what we're talking about, the downtown core.
Thanks, Kevin. So Advance San Francisco is grew out of a organization that's been around for maybe 40 years, which represents the interests of the larger employers in San Francisco. And a few years ago, there was an internal discussion about whether the typical way of representing interests of the business community, which primarily concerned tax policy and regulatory issues, was sufficient to really represent the interests of the business community. And the determination was that it wasn't, and that we needed to, as a community, be concerned about the broad width of issues in San Francisco. So we changed and in January rolled out Advance San Francisco. It's chaired by Larry Baer and a person named Lloyd Dean. Larry, of course, is head of the Giants. Lloyd is head of Dignity Health, which is a 140 hospital company which was headquartered here in San Francisco since 1856. And what we are interested in is essentially the quality of life in San Francisco, because it has so much to do about the ability of businesses and for the economy to prosper here in the city. So we have three main concerns. One is safe and clean streets, goes to crime and street behavior. We are concerned about the affordability issues in San Francisco because it is literally the most expensive city in the country to live and work in. And we are very concerned about economic viability, which is the issue which all of us are working together on. Has to do with the viability of the business district at the moment, but with the viability of business overall in San Francisco. So we are engaged with Kate and others, and Robbie especially, on working on these issues that you see here behind you to essentially repopulate the downtown area, because we've lost approximately, you may have discussed it, and if I'm repeating myself, repeating what you said, I apologize, but roughly 300,000 people per day less than what we were experiencing in 2019. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of transactions which support middle-income jobs. The ramifications of that population leaving San Francisco literally in a month. 90% of all office workers left in March 2020 is gigantic and huge. So that's one of the reasons we're all here talking about how do we build a new future for the city.
Well, I want to touch on the Public Realm Action Plan first. 150-page report, I think 143, I'm one of the people who read through it.
Thank you.
So, as part of that report, you talk about turning downtown into more of a pedestrian-friendly zone. You mentioned some aspects that make it already pedestrian-friendly, the fact that it's one of the flatter neighborhoods in the city, for example. But you also note that what is necessary to do that is a lot of temporary and potentially permanent street closures. Now that we have both the public and private here on stage, what are you doing to kind of cut the red tape, streamline that process? I mean, we're already starting to see some of the issues that are coming when shared spaces are having to kind of move into this permanent phase. So how are we going to try to balance those concerns and make it easier to make some of these actual pilots happen?
I'll go ahead and start. So in our plan, we actually call it street openings because we're opening the street to pedestrians and visitors and workers alike. And we are very thankful that the city stepped up, during the pandemic and actually brought out shared spaces. I think as community groups, we've been waiting for a permit process like shared spaces, and it just provides a great foundation for any nonprofit, any community group to close down a street, to have an activation, a festival, a block party. And as an active user of shared spaces, it's just been, wonderful for us to use. As Laura mentioned, 36% of our streets in downtown, is our streets. And I think that just leaves a huge opportunity to identify which streets, which alleys, which, areas in the economic core we can actually turn over to pedestrian activity. And the Public Realm Plan, is a wide scope, and we're looking at, all kinds of activation, anything from new seating and greenery and art to other festivals and block parties. We're also looking at vacant spaces. The vacancy rate here in San Francisco is continuing to be an issue and climbing. So the Public Realm Action Plan does address how do we re-energize the ground floor and also use the streets in front of those ground floor spaces as sort of a co-activation space.
Well, I might be able to just jump in from the public side of the house. I think shared spaces is actually a great example of what is possible if the city is both being very focused on cutting through red tape on behalf of the private sector, but also, importantly, if we're doing it in partnership with the private sector. In fact, people have said to me who haven't been to San Francisco in a while, and we are actually starting to see a decent uptick in the return of tourism. Still not where we want to be, but we're at 70, 80%, which is a lot better actually than where we have been lingering in the 40, 50% range with return to office. But what people say is having all of these shared spaces for outdoor dining, while it was a response to a crisis, turns out now that we have completely challenged the idea that San Francisco is not an outdoor city. And that's a wonderful thing. And that crisis forced the city to have to work much more quickly and collaboratively across departments. So shared spaces, again, is one example. We have a cross-departmental team that is then in partnership working with the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, our CBDs, even as we make those spaces permanent. And so these cross-departmental teams, which include the Department of Public Works, the fire department, my office, et cetera, I think has been a really important teachable moment for the city. And that is really the same principle that we are now trying to apply to other kinds of activations. So very much around how do we stand up now a very similar approach for temporary activations, whether it's a pop-up inside an actual built environment like a retail space, or it's a pop-up arts installation like Let's Glow. We were just talking about I love how you're saying it, a street
Opening. Yeah.
Street opening.
Street
Street
opening.
invitation, right? We have piloted other things like First Year Free citywide. We have Prop H, which has allowed us to expedite permitting for small businesses across the city. So I think we're really going to be trying to take those learnings and apply them directly now into the economic core.
So wait, I want to touch on something with you. You know, these sorts of activations really benefit from wide-ranging corporate and philanthropic support. But the activity we're seeing from a lot of business leaders is not necessarily really staking a claim. It's leaving the city, and often with a proverbial middle finger on the way out. I mean, what are we trying? Can you speak from the corporate perspective on how you're trying to get these people to, really make a stake a claim and invest in what the future of the city can be when they were, in a lot of cases, the beneficiaries of this last boom?
There's a larger group of companies and company leaders who are staying and want to see San Francisco built up than are leaving. And this plan here is exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for a set of activities which will grow the streets so that it is attractive not only to residents on the west side or tourists, but also employees. The companies we've been dealing with are very supportive and actively seeking just this type of activity because it helps them convince employees to come back because there's something to come back to. You have to treat employees as visitors, and the environment which they step into outside of their office environment is as important as the office environment. So to the extent that we can redesign San Francisco so it's not such a monocrop of offices, but it's offices plus homes, plus parks, plus bars, plus clubs, plus museums. That is an environment which make it much more easy for businesses to decide to remain here or come here because that's what will help them attract and employ employees.
Well, I want to touch on that because a topic on the top of mind for a lot of the general public and a couple of the questions that have already come up is this idea of conversion. A lot of the focus has been on office to residential conversion. But I'm kind of curious, should we be broadening our definition of what a successful conversion is? We look at all this empty office space and automatically think housing, but are there other sort of commercial uses that can be used in some of these empty spaces? I'll throw it out to the panel.
Well, let me just quickly grab on that because we've all talked about this. Yes, and a big deal will be art, such as what we're doing here in Leidesdorf. To the extent that we can expand San Francisco's art experience will make it hugely attractive to people to engage in. San Francisco used to have an arts district. It was very well known, especially for its expressionism back in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s. And we need to reinvigorate that down in the downtown area. In fact, identify a place where it could be an arts district. But in order to do that, you need affordable studio space, right? So New York is starting to do that. Companies are making space available for free or a nominal $1 a year for artists to come in and utilize it. Very similar to what Oakland did. and very successful. So the building up of the art community in San Francisco is very important to that. Just what you're talking about, Kevin, just a much more diversified reuse of the space.
And I would add to that I think in the same way that Wade spoke about drawing an employee or a worker back downtown, like the benefit is that these things that we're talking about, art and culture and, pedestrian friendly streets, draw people, right? We are talking about appealing to the human experience, and that applies to whether it's adding housing and converting to housing or diversifying or entertainment, which I think is another conversation. Arts, culture, and entertainment, because we have particularly north of Market in the district, it is predominantly office, which actually makes it conducive to different kinds of entertainment and other uses because you don't have potentially that kind of conflict with residential or neighborhoods. So I think there are a lot of questions, and from our side, we're trying to plant those seeds to say who kind of grabs on to see the opportunity here.
I mean, I think the point you make, which is a really important one, that if entertainment as an example, and I personally do think that there's great potential for more entertainment, more nighttime vibrancy, more music, but that runs right up against residential if you're literally putting it in the same block. So in some ways, I see, again, with the broader core, the financial district as a real opportunity to bring in some of these other uses that will do better because there isn't the density of residential in the financial district proper. I do want to sort of maybe provocatively say that we actually have built a lot of new residential immediately adjacent to the financial district in the south of Market area, in Mission Bay, and it's, I think, very important to recognize that when we compare our downtown or our economic core to other major cities, whether we're looking at LA or we're looking at Manhattan, the scale is very different. We are a very compact place. And so I would push back a bit on the notion that the highest and best use of many of our office buildings is conversion to residential. From what we are seeing and what we are having conversations with building owners, I want to challenge that there are many shades of gray of commercial use in the upper floors of these buildings. For some of the oldest buildings that are really going to prove themselves difficult to reimagine to the way that modern workers want to interact, we will and are actually looking at what I would call strategic conversions of some of those. But what we are also hearing is it's not that people don't want to come into work anymore. It's the experience when they come into work, both on the ground, but actually in their work environment, needs to justify them coming in. So that means more spaces for collaboration, more team space, less cubicles and individual offices. And also smaller companies. So, what we're seeing is larger companies shrinking their footprint. They're not all leaving, but they're right-sizing to the amount of space they need. So we are looking at opportunities to help buildings on the upper floors reimagine space, make smaller spaces. We are also starting to see pricing come down in our economic core, which is a good thing in the sense that it allows us to recruit more diverse kinds of businesses from different sectors and expanding the kinds of sectors that we are hosting here in our downtown is an important part of the work that our office is also undertaking. The last thing I will say, right before I came to the city a year and a half ago, I had come from running another nonprofit called SF Made. It supports manufacturing. Envisioning upper floors of buildings, they can have artists, they can have manufacturing. Actually, I usually wear my Shinola watch, which was built on the 6th floor of an office building, a former office building in Detroit. Educational uses, life science, any of these things are possible actually on the upper floors of our office buildings, and our zoning is already very permissible in our downtown to allow any of these uses. Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to go to an audience question because I think this is one is really interesting. And, I kind of, in my intro, I talked a little bit about kind of the us against them mentality that can arise when we talk about downtown versus the neighborhoods. But somebody in the audience posed the question, is that an old way of thinking? Is centralization kind of the way of the past, particularly as these work patterns have changed and folks are doing more economic activity where they live? Is there a decentralized model, or should we be thinking about kind of spreading out that economic activity across the city rather than sort of thinking about the downtown core as what it was in the era past?
I'll jump in with that one and say yes. The narrative of downtown versus the neighborhood here in San Francisco needs to end. You know, for us to be successful as one city, moving forward together, we have to think of our downtown as your neighborhood too. Imagine your downtown neighborhood becoming your destination for arts and culture, your destination for nightlife and entertainment, your destination for dining. And you know, we can do this, you know, together in changing that narrative and perception. Concurrently with our public realm action plan, we've also, as an organization, rebranded. So we used to be called the Downtown Community Benefit District. Now we're called the Downtown Partnership, you know, to really reflect of the work that we do and how we do it together. But once Let's Glow is over, you'll start to see new signage in the public realm that actually drops Financial District and FIDI from our naming conventions and just focuses on downtown and, again, telling that layered history. And I think, you know, coming up with or moving away from, you know, being called the Financial District and FIDI, I think automatically you think, you know, 9 to 5, you know, banks, financial institutions, people in suits. But that's not downtown San Francisco, and that's not what I think your downtown San Francisco should be.
Yeah, I'd like to say that just quickly, that the idea of downtown being somehow not San Francisco is ridiculous. It's the business district downtown is always been the heart of San Francisco. What happened recently is this tremendous boom of the digital economy kind of muffled that perspective or buffered or shouted it somehow. And now we have an opportunity to re-engage. I remember coming up here, grew up in a little town called Carmel, south of here, and when you were coming to San Francisco, especially as a kid, after your parents took you to the zoo, they took you down to Union Square. And that was the center of town. All this stuff was there to engage in, whether it was Gump's and its crazy little rooms, if you'll remember that, which you could explore, or, boy, a whole bunch of other stores that no longer exist. But downtown, or the business district, however you want to explain it, is everybody's. And we need to remind folks of that.
I also want to put that a little bit in a longer kind of historic perspective, which is that the reason we have cities, right? Cities are for shared resources, right? This is like the history cities are coming together for shared resources. And then downtown is almost like the further nesting of the concentration of resources. And in the downtown, it is like, as I mentioned, this, all roads lead there. That is where like the biggest concentration of transit is. It is probably the most walkable place in the Bay Area. So there are all these things that have been designed into making downtown have a particular opportunity and capacity to serve the city and be that kind of concentration. And I think what we're talking about is actually creating that experience that you do feel the sharing of those resources. And what those resources are our culture, our connection. It's a social experience and not just an economic one. And I think that is built into the fabric of the city. And we have had, really, I think it's more of a, with industrialization, there was this idea of you put work in one place and you put living in another place and you segregate all these things. And so I think we are, maybe a little delayed in coming out of that to rethink that integration in our downtown.
But it's not a binary, now all the work happens in the neighborhoods versus downtown. Mm-hmm. I think that's also important to state. This city deliberately limited our commercial space production, Prop M, as it's called, for many, many years. There is no other place in the city that can hold this concentration when people do choose to come out of their homes and to come to an event. Like, if this event, how many of you took transit here or came from outside of the city? how many of you would have still come to this event if I told you this event is going to be in the outer Richmond in a residential area? So we serve a regional role too. And I think we cannot forget that we serve a regional role as an economic driver, and I have to wear, again, my city hat, the tax basis of this city, the services, the more clean and safe our police officers that we're in the middle of trying to dramatically increase what has been a real shortfall, all of that gets funded through tax revenue. And we cannot, the way our tax system works, it's very much based on places where people actually work. So virtual doesn't pay tax the same way.
Well, I want to touch on that. So we talk a lot about the conversion thing, and I've heard some observers say that, let's say we do convert all the housing that's possible, 20 or 30% of the current commercial office stock. Does that handcuff, in a way, our ability to thrive as an economy? Because basically our entire budget is sort of focused and centered around the idea of a downtown as the central economic driver of the city.
Well,
Yes.
the downtown produces roughly 75% of the city's GDP. It is a massive economic machine which makes roads possible, clean water possible, increasing these schools possible. So in order for the city to prosper, the business district, the downtown area, the center of the city, absolutely has to prosper. Otherwise, the effects will be there'll be negative effects spread throughout the rest of the community, which we do not want. Now, that said, we still have to adopt the current times, and we have to figure out how to pull that off in a way which meets modern expectations and what's possible within the economy. When the recession hit 12 years ago, we got together and figured out some policies which would attract private investment, which would meet the economic concerns that grew then after the city had laid off 1,400 people and the tax revenues had declined up, in some instances, up to 40%. And the city was in a bad place. The federal bailout money this time prevented that same experience, even though the decline in economic activity was more severe than 12 years ago. But in any case, the idea was to attract the digital world to come in and locate and expand in San Francisco. And it was phenomenally successful. It was too successful in many ways, and there was concerns about it. But it was also, we initiated a boom and bust cycle. And we're on the bust side of that boom and bust cycle. So we have to re-engage, but re-engage in a way which continues with the viability and vitality of the city, but perhaps in more balance than it previously was.
So yeah, I think Kate, I've heard you speak before in the past about attracting these new industries, whatever this next chapter of the city's economic development will be, whether that's green technology or biotech or something like that. Things that hardware companies, things that have to kind of be centered in a physical location rather than software. I mean, that sounds great. I wish we could just bring all those people in, but there's a wide gulf between saying that and actually making that happen. When I was talking to a lot of companies in the pre-pandemic era, they had three problems. That was cost, cost, cost. And I guess, what are the levers the city can pull to actually, or policy ideas, are there tax incentives, are there ways to actually bring these new industries in?
Well, what I will say is nothing is off the table right now, and I think that's a very different place, certainly from me as a citizen looking in from the outside of where we have been historically. I think there is a clear recognition at the city that we have benefited from the vibrancy of our business sector. We have taxed significantly.
Whole bunch.
Yeah, the private sector to support a lot of what we are so known for in terms of all the community support and nonprofits and all the other things that we're very proud of. But we recognize this is a pivotal moment where we actually need to fight for every individual business to both stay here or come here. And so that said, and sort of, again, with my roots coming from a very different kind of a city that always has struggled economically, at least as long as I've been alive, our team is doing exactly that. But it is, you're correct, there's no silver, wand of we're going to create the Twitter tax break and suddenly refill the economic core with climate tech companies. But what I would posit is, we need to understand, and we are actually undertaking right now a pretty deep dive in partnership with the Bay Area Council and KPMG, the Chamber as well as Advance SF, to really understand what this city's particular sustainable competitive advantages are. In my perspective, we are not a place to come for folks that don't have a pretty high-end value proposition in the work that the business that they are trying to do. And so that means if you're a retailer, sure, we have some luxury brands, and I'm proud of the fact we still do have some luxury brands, but we need to look at retailers now who want to be here because they have some hybrid of retail and experiential, and maybe they're also doing design and manufacturing locally to create something really unique. When we look at our office users, we need to look at advanced manufacturers that need to be here physically, but that actually might be open to being in a downtown location, because our industrial stock, believe it or not, has almost no vacancy right now. We actually have quietly been building this whole network of small design prototyping firms across life science, across climate tech and green, as well as consumer products. And when we look at small office users, again, they're going to have to justify why they would want to be here. As an example, we're right now recruiting a company from Australia that has a whole new software technology that allows cities, among others, to do 3D representations of what you might have looked here as a 2D model. They want to be here because they want to be around city governments on the West Coast that can sort of absorb the idea of technology more quickly than other kinds of cities in the US. So I think it's really going to come down to our core competitive advantages versus other very expensive places. The last thing I will say, though, is housing, right? There is clearly a recognized significant shortfall in housing in this city. We clearly have to do better as a city, public and private, at actually moving forward and building housing. But I also think there's a recognition now that we have to look regionally as well. We are not, even if we could immediately unstick projects that have become stuck, whether in entitlement or for political reasons, and get that forward, the key for me is also looking at the region and improving our public transit and our connectivity into places where people are living, so that we start to act more like a Manhattan in the context of the 5 boroughs, as opposed to trying to solve for everything within the 7x7 limits of the city. So regionalism, I think, is another important part.
So yeah, that's part of the kind of the larger, broader vision of what can happen. I think right now we have a lot of small businesses in downtown that are struggling, and I think there's recognition from the city and from the city's budget office that hybrid work is here to stay. And I guess my question is, I talk to a lot of these pizzeria owners or what have you, and they're like, from day to day, my business is not stable. I could be normal one day and then be completely empty the next. Is there a way to structure hybrid work in a way to actually create more stability for these businesses and for the city's economic health? Create a benchmark to build on rather than just having these sort of wild swings on a day-to-day basis.
Well, it's an interesting issue. We had a previous meeting in April, and a person was concerned that companies were not making employees come back. So he turned to a person across the table and said, "You have to make your employees come back." And the other person turned to him and said, "That boat sailed," which means the business models have changed, and they're not going to change back. And it's because companies, especially in the digital realm, found out that their employees could work from home, and they really didn't miss a beat on productivity. In fact, they made pretty good, sizable income from reducing their operating expenses. And that just the light bulb went off, which is we can do this. Now the question is, there are other factors which come into play, such as friends and partnerships and culture within a company experience, and experience of the broader quality of life when you're outside of the office. So it looks like 3 days a week, roughly, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, with Friday and Saturday being flexible. There are variations within that, but it's not going to be what it was. So I think we're a few years away from understanding really what the pattern is going to be. And the problem with that is the transactions people who work in offices engage in when they leave the office. And they go to lunch, or they come in early for breakfast, or they go to a store. And that's why I come back to the issue of repopulation, because that the economic health those transactions provide for the city are really based on numbers, not necessarily only office workers, right? So we need to change this area so that it's much more populated, it's a much more diverse set of undertakings, why people are in downtown.
To kind of piggyback off of that is there's no question our small businesses and our restaurants have held on for dear life.
Right.
But they're not, I want to be clear, they're not done fighting yet. And, to Wade's point, they're operating what they normally would operate, 5 days a week. They're operating Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, 3 out of 5, 3 out of 7 days a week, which is not sustainable for any restaurant in town. And then you add the difficulty with hiring, the ridiculous inflation, just costs of doing business. The math just doesn't work out. So what I go back to is doing what we can do, in the public realm, and how do we diversify, that portfolio Mondays, Fridays, after 5 p.m. I think San Francisco, I don't know the time frame, but could become a 24-hour, downtown if we wanted to, right? But we have to work at that. A way to diversify our portfolio is, and I believe that there are BIPOC-owned businesses that have just been completely priced out of being able to operate in downtown for decades. And we now have a wide range of vacancies on the ground floor, on second and third floor, that I think are prime to open those doors to people that have been completely closed off before. I know my team is committed. I'm committed in a new campaign after the holidays. We're calling it Pop Into Downtown. And I'm actually talking to a arts and culture institution this week, and talking to a property owner, and just, again, having a casual conversation and saying, this space has been vacant for 3 years. It's probably going to be vacant for a little bit longer. Why don't you give me that space for 6 to 9 months? Let me put somebody in there who can operate as a pop-up. Maybe we can provide some grant money, for them to do so. You can market the space as something, different to a potential tenant, and give that, that small business, that museum, that arts and culture institution, just an opportunity that they never had before.
So I'm going to address one of the elephants in the room, because I'm getting a lot of questions about this. We're talking about downtown. We're talking about the economic core being 24-hour city, 24-hour type of neighborhood. One of the barriers to that is what people have been bringing up: public safety issues, homelessness, some of the crime issues. And it's clear that will need to be addressed or improved if we're going to actually make these things happen. And what is the actual pathway to that? I know the mayor recently put in more money for community ambassadors, but it seems like we need a larger strategy to kind of deal with this, if this is the way that we're going to think about this neighborhood going forward.
I'd just say from our perspective, it's the number one issue. And we're not going to be able to get at the good stuff until this issue is managed. And I mean, you choose your numbers. I think Washington, D.C. has 60 police per 10,000, New York 52, San Francisco has 17. it doesn't work that way. That level of perception of safety and security doesn't reduce anxiety on the streets. And there's too many stories of people being afraid to come to plays at night, people who are nervous about their experience during the day in Union Square, people running into people smoking crack in front of City Hall. It just can't continue if the goal is to restabilize San Francisco. That includes the issue of sufficient mental health services. There's been some expansion of that recently, but it's not enough. So, and there's possibilities of doing more, but obviously it's almost a 50-year issue now. Started with Mayor Agnos trying to tackle it, and it's very controversial. Lots of opinions, but at the end of the day, people have to, in general, perceive that the streets are safe, and because of that, there is no second thought or compunction about coming into the heart of the city.
So I would offer it's sort of a multi-pronged strategy now, right? So I think recognizing, and certainly from where we sit at the city, we recognize that, here I am running a department called Economic Development, right. But a lot of the welcome ambassadors that we've talked about, both in the economic core that work in partnership with some of the CBD's ambassadors, as well as Urban Alchemy, which works in the Civic Center and Tenderloin and Mid-Market. My department supports those contracts that funds those folks. So I am much more deep into clean and safe than I ever thought I would be when I took this job. Here's a couple things I'll offer. So the first is having people come repopulate our downtown, come to a lecture, go to the theater, go to work, come downtown to check out some cool performance. That's actually part of the solution. And this is not to make excuses, but it is to say that many US downtowns are struggling with the very similar dynamic. It's just that we're very compact. So if you go to Las Vegas, for example, you go to the Strip, it feels great on the Strip, right? You go 2 blocks off of that Strip.
Scary.
The concentration of open air drug use and homelessness and street behaviors is staggering. It makes us look tame by comparison. If you go to Chicago, Chicago right now is currently experiencing a tremendously scary wave of murders and assaults happening on their street. So a lot of major US cities are struggling with stuff, but we are unique in that we're all kind of on top of each other. We have the Tenderloin, and it's right next to Union Square, and it's right next to our financial district, and it's right across from our South of Market. So what are we doing about it? And how are we tracking progress? So the first is absolutely actively recruiting folks into our police academies. That is the key right now. We actually do have more budget in our budget, and I expect that with the next budget, we will continue to support budget for PD, but we now actually need to play catch up by filling more folks into the police academies, and that's part of my workforce development capacity, is to try to recruit those folks. The second thing that's going on are these ambassadors. And ambassadors are not, people say, well, what's the end game here? Like, how many more ambassadors can you put onto the street? It really isn't about putting more ambassadors out there and just moving people around, pushing people around. But the reality is, right now, we sort of need to hold the beachhead, if you will. So the purpose of more ambassadors is to provide more safety and evenings. Time's going to change next weekend, and it's going to be dark earlier, and it's the holiday shopping season, and we want you all to come here and spend your money and enjoy your holidays here. So we have seen success already with our ambassadors. When we have Moscone Center events, we basically line the streets around Moscone and provide safe passage from hotels to the convention center. We've actually been providing now support all the way into the evening around the major theaters, so the Golden Gate, the Orpheum, to provide more of a sense of safety in the evening. So ambassadors can be eyes and ears, and one of the important parts of this most recent announcement from the mayor is that we are now going to be having ambassadors go down into the major transit stations. So on my way here, came from Civic Center, there was some stuff going on. PD was down in there taking care of that. So it's been really, again, this collaboration where we now have BART and Muni and my office and PD actively working, I think is the key. And then the last part is more of the centralization of our services to help people in distress. And part of the announcement last week is our Department of Emergency Management, which is where the 911 calls come in, is now actually going to take on a coordination role of all of our outreach services. So our homeless outreach, our public health response. And I think that coordination is essential because we aren't always coordinated. And I think that all of that has to work together while we also get more of you and more of me and more of you to spend more time doing wonderful things in our core. So it kind of has to work together.
I appreciate the question because without doing, the public space activation, the beautification, we have to have the space clean and safe first, first and foremost. And, going back in time, as I mentioned before, as a community benefit district, we formed, again, in January 2020, the pandemic hit. Virtually every ground floor space was completely boarded up, broken glass everywhere, and you would see graffiti that would span whole sides of buildings and walls. And that was my first job, was just cleaning up downtown. And we rolled up our sleeves with a group of 4 ambassadors at the time. And we spent about 6 to 9 months as providing establishing a baseline level of cleanliness in downtown. And it took a while because we wanted to prepare for when people came back. Because at the time, we lost 96% of our pedestrian activity in downtown. So all those cleanliness issues were completely exposed. Last fiscal year, we spent about $2.1 million on cleaning and safety efforts through our property assessments. And we've actually seen a dramatic decrease over the last 6 months, especially in our downtown area. We tracked about a 41% decrease in quality of life issues, close to a 90% drop in graffiti. Our rule of thumb is graffiti needs to be cleaned up in less than 24 hours. My rule, less than an hour. The longer that an issue is out on the street, it just breeds more blight. So we are very proactive in our cleaning and safety operations, starting at 6 a.m., before business opens up for the day. We also hire a nonprofit outreach group to go out and really provide that passionate care to those who are struggling on our streets. And I'm really proud to say that we've reconnected 17 unhoused individuals on our streets with their long-lost family and friends. It's pretty remarkable meeting somebody on our street and realizing that they've been on the same corner for 10 to 20 years. I'll never forget my first experience doing street outreach, and I met an individual same corner, living, panhandling and such. I just asked him for his name, how long has he been here, where is he from, and he was displaced from 2005 because of Hurricane Katrina and came to San Francisco to find a safe haven and was still living on our street. And so when we think about our unhoused population, we very much take a very compassionate approach, with our operations, and that's certainly been helping as well.
I'm going to take this question from the audience, and then we're getting to the end of our time. The person asked, can somebody address the trend in commercial property tax revenue downward assessments? And I'll kind of do the sort of second order question on that. All these things we're talking about, bringing in new types of folks, new types of industries, sort of requires rents changing, costs changing, and it will require probably property tax or property values declining and property tax value declining, at least in the short term. And yeah, I feel like it took a while for the city to officially recognize that hybrid work was here to stay. And I'm kind of curious on, what is the recognition that maybe some of this short-term pain is necessary for a longer-term transformation, and where the city and where citizens can kind of play a role in helping ease that transition?
Well, it's starting with requests by commercial property owners to reassess the value of their property. Similar situation happened 12 years ago. And the city is actively considering the feasibility and whether the requests warrant attention. Likelihood, yes, there will be significant property devaluations as indicated by tax reassessments. How much that will be is unclear. I think what is clear, even though murky, is that this process will take a few years. It's not going to just be, at the end of, like the summer of 2023 we'll have gone through that process. We might just be at the front end of that process. But that's a dynamic which is, in a sense, outside of our control. It's a market response to a market condition. What we really have to focus on is, and again, when we start talking about repopulating downtown, it's repurposing. It's reimagining. It's creating a new foundation of value which can support property valuations, because the buildings just simply respond to demand, right? If there wasn't any demand, we wouldn't have the towers. People wanted to be here. So what is the demand which we feel is imperative in order to sustain the city's functioning? And that's really the primary focus. Yes, there will be stories about devaluation. Hopefully, there will be stories about a decline in expense, because literally San Francisco is the most expensive city in the country to do business. And now, as Kate suggested, there's a tremendous amount of competitive localities throughout the rest of the country that are seeking folks in our city and asking them to move because of the distance between San Francisco having trouble, companies in the city recruiting at $300,000 a year for a young engineer, because that person can't experience the lifestyle they would expect at $300,000 a year in San Francisco. But if you were in Columbus or Nashville or Salt Lake City, they could experience the lifestyle they expect at that level for a salary of $80,000. So there's a huge...
Except their symphony's not as good.
Except the symphony's not so good, so go to Chicago. I know. But so those are some of the issues. Yeah, we're going to be wrestling with the value of the city, but the real focus is on building it up.
I mean, look, it's a necessary thing, right? We understand certainly that as valuations, and we don't have discretion as a city, by the way, in assess values. So the whole process is state regulated. But if someone can provide data that shows that their valuation has been changed. Generally, what these are temporary reduced assessments that are tracked over time until the market picks up again and the valuation returns to kind of where it was. So, and the advantage, if I can call it that, the silver lining to what is a moment that is dark for everyone, right, is if rents come down, then it gives me the tools that I need and tools that you need to get more different kinds of activities into these buildings, which then over time are what ultimately support valuations returning to a level that's acceptable. So I see it as my role and our city's role, and our mayor sees it as, how can we shorten this transition period so that we're dealing with years and not a decade of transition. So a lot of what I'm focused on in partnership with community is accelerating the transition, if you will, but recognizing that absolutely valuations will and are adjusting, but so are prices, and that can be a good thing in attracting new uses.
Thank you for our audience for the great questions, and I think we're heading to the end of our program here, and I'll ask the guests one final question. How can audience members and people around the city monitor efforts in downtown San Francisco, if things are getting better, if things are getting worse? And you personally, what is something that makes you optimistic and excited about the potential for downtown San Francisco's future? We can go from Robbie and go down.
Certainly. So we are actually launching a new destination website this week, knock on wood, downtownsf.org. And if you go onto our news section, we track a lot of data about return to office, and we have a reopening dashboard. So if you're nerdy and want some data, we have it on our website. We're also going to have an event page that is going to list all kinds of events and activations that community groups that we're working on together that you can see. And, what really makes me optimistic, especially personally, is just the fact that we're all coming together and asking the questions, and we're having this dialogue. That means we all care, and we all love the city, and we want to see it, succeed and thrive. So, for me personally, doing these, presentations and panels and seeing all of you in the audience, can't see everybody at home, but I know you're there and I know you care, and thank you for joining us.
On a similar note, I will say that publishing, we started the Downtown Public Realm Action Plan about a year ago, and publishing it wasn't clear to me what reaction we would get. And one of the things that was very interesting and kind of helped me feel excited and optimistic about the future here is how many people came out of the woodwork to say, oh, I want to do something there. And they were almost looking for the opportunity. And we created, look at this location, look at these locations, look at these opportunities. And whether it's arts groups or business owners or restaurateurs, it really has felt like there's this, I've been looking for a place to put my stamp here or my thing, and that kind of energy, instead of it being someone else's problem, it's actually this isn't, we all want to be doing things that we can, and doing them together, that kind of draw for experience. And I will also say from my team that the experience when we are in the office together, and the experience particularly of younger members of my team, they still want that mentorship and connection. That is what cities can bring us. So that makes me super optimistic and excited to move into this next phase.
I think for me, when I came here 30 years ago as a 20-something, I came from somewhere else and befriended a lot of other people like me who weren't from here. But now as I sit here as a mom and have 3 kids who were born and raised here, and one is about to head off to college, and this narrative that I think, are one of the major U.S. cities with the lowest number of youth under the age of 18. And the narrative was, oh, you come here, you do your cool tech thing, and then you leave. Or you leave when it's time to have kids. The fact that I've got 3 kids here, and they've grown up in the Mission, and they grew up knowing that you don't ride your big wheel into the pile of leaves under the tree, because there could be weird things under the leaves. It's not that they accept the street conditions, they're aware of it, and they know we're working, and they know that Mom's working, among others, to try to make it better. But they see their future here. My older daughter wants to go to school in New York, and then she has this business idea, and she wants to come back and do it here. My younger daughter, who is autistic and has some intellectual disability, has this cool idea of cooking and bowling and somehow all that combined, and she wants to do it here. My son has his own thoughts, but the fact that we are raising now this next generation from here, and they see the warts and the issues, but they also see the potential. If we can get more young people to want to be here and stay here, or come here and stay here, that to me is an amazing bellwether of hope. And I think in some ways, the crisis that we've both been through from a health perspective as a community, from an economic perspective, and now from a physical realm, spatial perspective, is actually bringing people together and creating a vision of what we can be that, maybe it wouldn't have been so interesting if we had been just like we were back in 2019, where we had literally no vacancies for anything new if you couldn't pay for it. So I actually think it's, I have to say, maybe I feel blessed that we're struggling through this, that we have this opportunity now.
Well, they can read the standard, Kevin. And actually, the standard, this is not a quip to them, but you're doing, I think, great work on telling stories about what the current condition is, and what the issues are, and what the possible solutions are. But it's similar to Kate and others. Even though we're experiencing unprecedented situation in San Francisco, and it is almost hard to get your mind around it. It's so big. It's still it's created a huge set of opportunities which we didn't have 2 years ago. There's been the downtown San Francisco destination idea, the public realm plan is possible because we have this kind of newly fragmented series of resources that are not so locked up like they used to be. So now it's much more available to play with. And I think we will, if it works, we will use this as an opportunity to create a city which we want and have wanted but couldn't get to. And it's going to be much more neighborhood-focused, diverse, intriguing, exciting area than it has been in the past. And I think that's what we're looking to accomplish, and that's been on the agenda for a while. But now with this kind of release of opportunities, we can go for it. And that's certainly a better perspective, mental health-wise, in my mind, than this is disaster and everything is going to collapse and we're going to be the new Detroit. That is not going to happen in San Francisco, but it's going to take a lot of work by a lot of people in a much more cooperative way than we've experienced in the past to get to where we want to go, as demonstrated by these beautiful images behind us.
Thank you all for your answers, and I wish we could go on longer discussing some of these important issues with this great group of people, but that brings our program to a close. I'd like to thank again Robbie Silver of the Downtown SF Partnership, Laura Cresamano of Site Lab, Kate Sophis of the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and Wade Rose of Advance SF for joining us today, and thank you in the audience as well. I'm Kevin Trong of the San Francisco Standard, and this Commonwealth program is now adjourned. Thank you all.